How much have you thought about culture? How it affects you? Even what it is? This conversation with Adrian McIntyre was phenomenal. I really wanted someone to come in and challenge me on this concept. He did just that, and in the most constructive way possible. We dug deep into what the ever so elusive culture word means, and if it's even possible to construct one. Dr. Adrian McIntyre is a cultural anthropologist, media personality, and international recognized authority on human communication. He has worked in over 30 countries as a digital marketing consultant, communication strategist, researcher, journalist, and media spokesperson for two of the largest humanitarian relief agencies in the world. Today, he delivers speeches and workshops on high-performance communication and culture. He also trains individual entrepreneurs, small business owners, and corporate teams on how to harness the power of personal storytelling, digital marketing, and media to boost their visibility and accelerate the growth of their business. He also earned a PhD in cultural anthropology, which is what I find most fascinating about him, from the University of California, Berkeley, where he was a Fulbright Scholar and National Science Foundation Research Fellow. Before we jump into it, again, I'd really appreciate it if you could go and check out Patreon and, click the link and go to my page, which is patreon.com/outofthecave. And on Patreon, you can donate $1, $5, $10. There are a couple different packages, kind of like Kickstarter. And I'd be really grateful if you could donate a little bit and get some cool rewards for doing that. Let's now take our 12th step out of the cave with Adrian McIntyre.
What is happening?
Dude, pumped. I'm really excited for this one. Mainly because this kind of culture and this conversation and culture is like the linchpin for the entire kind of society that I've been thinking about and talking about with everybody. And every conversation, cultures come up at least once, right? So it's just, the most important thing, I think, to creating a healthy culture. Without that, nothing else I think can really be supported. I mean, it's the base. It's what holds everything together, right? So before we really get into it, I like to kind of set the frame about the conversation because it's sometimes challenging to talk about these ideas because we typically think about how to solve what's going on here in this society and these problems, which is awesome and still needs to happen. And that's our frame though, so I got to kind of reframe it, and we'll get off topic in the conversation, which is okay. I'll just try to I always try to bring it back as much as I can, and if you can, do your best as well. But I kind of like to start off by saying, let's imagine that we've purchased an island off the coast of Fiji. Our goal is to create an optimized society fresh from start, meaning we'll rethink the culture, economic structures, educational systems, government systems, and urban development landscape. I always tongue twister on that one. So keep in mind that I can provide you with whatever resources necessary within the bounds of physics and whatever is available on Earth, or potentially asteroids. We might be able to get something from there if we need to. So let's start out by examining that. Let me reset that. Let's start out by examining this in terms of building a business culture from scratch. In what ways might it be similar, building this culture for this society, to building a culture in a business, like as an entrepreneur, like building that from scratch? What can we kind of take from there and apply to building this societal culture?
So it's interesting that you're asking me this, because I'm a cultural anthropologist. So in theory, I should have all the answers to all of that, right? However, we should start, I think, by describing the limits of that perspective so that you get a sense of what this is and isn't. So, cultural anthropology in general, comes from the Greek anthropos, the human thing, plus logos, knowledge of the human thing. So at some level, my discipline is a human science in which being human is both the subject and the object of the inquiry. Okay, so it's humans asking questions about what it means to be human, and trying to understand that human thing through the limits of our own humanity. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And anthropology has a little bit of a troubled past insofar as it emerged as a professional human science in very close concert with imperial and colonial forms of human interactions. So to know something about the savages that lived in a far-off island was often in service of governing them, subduing them, controlling them.
Oh, fascinating.
Yes. Yeah, so, and at the same time, there were some people who called themselves anthropologists that employed a kind of scientific racism that said there are these different human types and ranked them in order of their intelligence and sophistication and civilization.
Fascinating.
And at the same time, it was a very famous anthropologist, Franz Boas, who came along and debunked the racism of the day, deploying anthropology and its forms of inquiry as a way to say, no, this is nonsense. Like, human beings are a single species. We need to understand their differences, but we can't assume that there is any inherent hierarchy in the human thing. Yeah. So you get the good and the bad with us anthropologists. You get the people who are, perpetuating racism and colonialism and every other thing. Yeah. And you also get the people trying to save us from ourselves. Yeah, right?
As with kind of anything, right?
I think so.
And the one thing I love about this and kind of what you're saying too is what I've been thinking about a lot with this society is making it a society that its whole goal is just to discover and learn more, right? I think that's the point of human existence is just to discover and learn more in science.
Yeah. Now, coming to your society, your hypothetical, but maybe not project. Right. There's another thing to know about anthropology, which is it started out as a descriptive human science, not a prescriptive one. So in other words, most anthropologists would not have assumed their role was to tell people how to organize themselves better. In fact, there is this idea of cultural relativism that's baked into especially American anthropology in the 19th and 20th centuries, that our job is to describe and analyze, understand human phenomena without judging them. Again, a very useful perspective when you're trying to get people to, and what is that as opposed to racism, as opposed to xenophobia, as opposed to the idea that you come from that place, so you must be a bad person, right? No, we have to understand that place on its own terms, like from the native's point of view, as was classically said. But interestingly enough, I think you spend enough time paying attention to human things and you start to have opinions about them, even if it's not scientifically appropriate to write all of your opinions into your monographs and journal articles and so on. At some level, as a person, you start to notice there are things that work and that enhance our human flourishing, and there are things that are opposed to it. So, and I'm not bound in any way by the constraints of the normative science model, since I don't work in a university and my career is not on the line for anything I say. So I'm happy to do this. So. Yeah. Fundamentally, you're asking if we were to start a society, a group from scratch. And my first pushback onto the premise would be, is that even possible? Okay. So we're talking about culture. Yeah. What is that? At some level, we have to acknowledge the fact that nobody's ever had a great answer to that question, and there have been lots and lots of different answers. No doubt to that question. No doubt, right? It is like, it's a hot button word. Which, right? It's one of the things that
in business, it's like, we're doing this culture work, and I'm like, that's cute, great, that's awesome, right? And here's one thing that I can tell you is that there have been various traditions of inquiry. So again, in the human sciences, that would define culture or any object of study
in a particular way because that meant the methods they were going to use to study it would be a good fit. You see the same thing in linguistics, for example. Defining the science of language to mean studying grammar is one way of doing it, as opposed to studying vernacular speech. Depending on how you define the object of your study, you're going to take a different approach. You're going to take different methods. So there's been lots of different answers to this question. What is culture?
Right.
And I think what's great about this is there is no definitive answer.
Yeah.
At some level, what are we talking about? An invisible set of norms, of a shared knowledge base, a story tradition, thing, and to keep this from just being literary, we're talking about a set of human practices that define culture, right?
Absolutely.
So
I'd agree.
If we were to design a culture, we'd have to ask ourselves, are we starting from scratch? Probably not. Because every human culture is uniquely keyed to its environment. Whether that environment is a company or a South Pacific island or a scientific culture in a nuclear physics lab, right? There are ways in which environment and human interactions, practices, and the language we use to both describe and create our world, they all kind of fit together. Go ahead.
Yeah, so 100% agree with that. And I think a big part of what I envision as a possibility is the culture gets constructed, and a big part of it is you can't, I don't think, just take people from this culture and be like, okay, we're going to do this, because you're going to get the same problems. We have, as you mentioned earlier, right, when you're going to study all these ways of being and whatever, all that will bleed in, and you'll get the pieces you don't want. You have to, I think, really be intentional, get people to really work on themselves and get a very specific set of people that have those certain qualities that you want to kind of emerge in this society, right? And all that's the main thing is around building like a healthy culture, a healthy society, right? Having that be really what you're striving for.
So on the one hand, yes, but that starts to sound dangerous.
One last thing.
Go ahead. I'll tell you why.
It does. I know.
Go ahead.
I keep that in check too. Yeah. I'm like, you also want to give people their freedoms and all that as well. But a big part of it is you got to think generationally too, right? That's how culture really forms, is over the long term. So you got to think really key. The biggest part is about how you educate the children and how the next 2 or 3 generations will adopt your ways of living.
Maybe,
right?
Maybe. But one thing for sure is that culture, if the word means anything, right, and it gets a little bit tricky to use it as a noun at some level. When you really press on this and you start thinking about it, we talk about culture like it's a thing, like it has some concreteness to it, and maybe there's no there.
You're right.
However, having said that, the same could be said of language, for example. Not just a language, French, German, Spanish, English, Arabic, Mandarin, but language itself, what Saussure called langue, like the phenomenon language with a capital L. At some level, there is at least two dimensions in which it exists, and one is through time, and the other is in the present, in space, right? And one of the things about a language, take English for example, but you could take any language, is you can take a slice of it, a snapshot at any moment in time, and there is something called English that native speakers and others who have learned the language can all relate to as a shared phenomenon. And yet if you look diachronically, you look through time, you'll see that the English that is spoken now is not the English that was spoken 200 years ago, is not the English that was spoken in by Anglo-Saxon tribes. It wasn't English, but anyway, you can trace it all the way back, and so you have both. English is always English, and yet it's not the same phenomenon. So it's like it's not static. It's dynamic, and yet at any slice of the present moment, it is what it is. Does this make sense?
No.
So I feel like I'm back in an undergraduate philosophy class. Like it's the same and it's totally different at the same time, right?
No, but honestly, as you were talking, I was going to bring up that point. You know, like we're talking English, but if we were to say, lit and dude and come to some of these words back in the 1700s, to someone back, they'd be like,
what the
they were less woke.
Yeah, exactly. They were
so,
great word. Woke? No, they couldn't even comprehend that word. That's not a word to them. But now that's going to enter in the dictionary.
That I woke before dawn.
Oh, yeah.
So, So, yes, there's this historical dimension, which on the one hand shapes the present.
Sure.
And yet on the other hand, there is constant innovation, invention, breaking the rules. I mean, one of the things that defines, let's just use the word as a noun for a second, a culture, is that it's clear when something is outside of it. So somewhere there are edges.
Oh, of course.
Like you're in, you're out.
Yeah.
And there are a set of performances that let people know you're in. Like if you think about culture, like street culture.
Yeah.
Right? That's a very clear and yet totally fuzzy, indistinct phenomenon. And yet it's clear when you're in and when you're out. Right? It's the same thing with organizational culture. You know, you would get people saying like, well, we don't do that here. Well, why not? I don't know. We just don't. It's not what we do. It's not our culture.
Yeah.
It ends up being a shorthand for something that's very elusive.
Yeah.
Because how does that thing get created? Where did it come from? And could you, to go back to your formative question here, could you start one from nothing?
Yeah.
I mean, probably.
Yeah. Totally.
But could you control it the whole time? Most certainly not. Because you're involving human beings whose own cultural productions and innovations are what's shaping the thing. Like, what if there's a very charismatic, like, again, you just look at this through a pretty coarse historical lens. You know, there's a shaman or a prophet who shows up on your island, right? Yeah. And they have a totally different vision of things.
Yeah.
Like maybe they're, consuming hallucinogenic substances. Maybe they have epilepsy. But in any case, they have...
We'd be doing that too.
Well, there's an interesting argument to be made about where these outliers come from. Totally. Like where these visions of a world different than ours.
Yeah, no doubt.
Right?
Yeah.
So... setting that aside for a second, all the super religious people now convinced that I'm awful. But setting that aside for a second, I think we have to ask ourselves this question: like, is it not at some level sort of presumptuous to assume we can control and manage and select for this set of cultural outputs that you want? That's where it, to me, starts to sound a little bit scary. It starts to sound like social engineering, which is a slippery slope to eugenics. And we're not going there. Not on my watch.
Of course. I totally agree. I totally agree. Not on mine either. Like, that is the furthest thing I want to happen. However, I don't think you can control culture, but I think you can guide it. I think you can set up the frameworks and the environments in which it can flourish in a more positive way. And you can see it right now where, like, I think a culture that's getting formed in America right now it's starting to emerge, and it's gotten a lot of growth, which is like kind of more healthy. You see a lot more companies changing, doing the organic, free range, gluten-free stuff like
paying for your yoga classes and having in-house gym facilities
and on top of that,
putting organic granola in the cafeteria.
Yeah, exactly. And also on top of that, I think a big subset that I want to focus on outside of like healthy is the scientific aspect and knowledge, right? And having that be like very important, because if you're teaching people, I think, the right way, I think that forming a culture of like I said, discovery and using the scientific method, I think that creates an amazing culture, because not much is going to get by people, because everyone's really good at analyzing and really looking for what's true, and not just like taking everything at face value.
Sure. Like
most people do now, because that's not the forefront of how we.
Well, because most people, and this is not a judgment, it's an observation. Most people are not trendsetters, are not change agents, are not the leaders of culture, right? They and if you look at any human group, no matter what size, whether it's your company or whether it's the Trobriand Islands, right? There's always going to be people who set the tone, and others want to follow along, and that's part of how culture gets made and remade. At some level, everything is a remix. It just is,
no doubt,
right?
Yeah.
To coin a phrase, and we're constantly And this is where I think understanding culture as not in any way separate from the actual human beings who would identify with that culture. Although whether you identify or not is an interesting question. If you think about like language, what defines a native speaker of a language is they are someone for whom the rules of that language are tacit. That means they can produce grammatically correct sentences without thinking about the rules. So it has their native ability is invisible. It's the people who are learning a new language that are trying to think about noun, verb, agreement, subject, object, masculine, feminine, right. Where does it go, right? Yeah. Once you become fluent in a language, that's all in the background. So once you become fluent in culture, at some level, that's all in the background. Yeah. And you are remixing and reperforming your version of that every single day. And at some point, there might be enough difference in what you're doing, and you've got a crew around you that likes it enough, and you're all doing that, and now you've got something separate. But it's like soap bubbles. It's like the one that you blew that got really big, but then it split into two. And now that one's going off into the trees, and this one's going over here to burst on the hot cement of the summer afternoon.
Right? We just have to create that soap bubble.
Well, we are. That's the interesting thing. So totally. even the premise, and I mean, I love the conversation, and I still think the premise is ridiculous. Why do you need a separate island? Why do you need to start from scratch? A really interesting question could be...
This society is really unhealthy.
Okay.
It's really sick.
But every society's got healthy and unhealthy things. Every complex system...
There's a level of unhealthiness, and there's a level and there's the amount that you need to fix in order to cure the disease.
I don't know. This may turn out to be where we've uncovered a fundamental difference in perspective. Like,
and I love it.
Is it broken beyond repair?
I'm excited, man. Like, or I haven't had many people who disagree that this is possible.
I don't know that I'm disagreeing that it's possible. I think I'm disagreeing that I don't know that you need to.
Oh, okay.
In other words,
sure.
Okay, first of all, you have to. One thing that an anthropologist would tell you about culture is it's never monolithic. You know, it's not always just one thing.
Okay.
Lithics, big rocks. Monolith, like giant stone thing. It's never just one solid, massive thing. Like, you know, the pyramid, right? The boulder. So, like, you are free. We are free to innovate, to rebel, to secede. Like, we don't have to have a blank slate. At some level, that's a game for philosophers. Right? What if we had this, like imagine a time machine, like these are philosophy class hypotheticals. Yeah. Nothing wrong with them.
No, they're fine.
It's just I'm a pragmatist who lives in this actual world, and I would love us to say, well, shit, let's just start doing it differently. And if we do it effectively enough, like, I don't know, there's just already so many pluralities, right? And this is where shifting our thinking away from culture as a noun to culture as an adjective, right? Talking about culture, the cultural dimensions of this or that, or even better yet, culture as a verb. What do we do and what do we make and how are we going to culture differently together? That gets really interesting to me. But still, it's your show and you ask the questions, so I have to play along. Tell me more.
You have to play along at all, man. Just give it to me straight. I like it, and I think disagreement is very healthy and very important.
It's part of that scientific inquiry, and that you know.
And one of my questions, honestly, is how can it not work? That's what I like to look in and dive into. I'm not a utopian.
Yes,
I want to make that clear. Like, I don't think this is going to be like amazing. Everything's going to be happy and everyone's going to be great. Yeah. I just believe in better. I believe in. This one it's not doing terrible. I think it's done phenomenally.
Let me push back
but
here.
I think we can do a lot better with where we're at now.
Define this one. What are its edges? What do you mean when you talk about this culture that is so broken?
Sure. I think that.
What is the object of that claim?
Okay, so right now, for the sake of it, we'll go with American culture, right?
Okay. And are you sure there is such a thing?
To an extent.
Cool.
Right.
Go ahead. Keep going.
So there's.
I'm not sure there's not. By the way.
Right. No, I love it.
It's worth asking.
Using the Socratic method, one of my favorite forms of inquiry, which is a show on the podcast actually.
Fantastic.
So just for the sake of the argument, we're going to say there is an American culture, and I'm going to say it's kind of comprised of we'll just go with what the common ideals are, right? What when you think of America, here's what people might typically think of, right? The American dream, right, is a common theme, which is you can get the house you want, you can do whatever you want, you're free. Freedom is a common word they say, okay, right? And this is just like the general. I'm just giving you based on getting where some of this is.
You're describing American values. Are you sure that that's American culture?
But values play into culture, correct? For sure. Am I wrong?
No,
okay,
for sure.
Okay, yeah. Because the values are kind of what make up the culture and the way people interact, because they have these values that are influencing how people are dealing with each other and what their beliefs are, their belief systems. So capitalism, right, is another big piece of the culture, and making money and using that in a way to advance and grow and innovate.
Yeah,
right?
Capitalism is an economic system, right?
Yeah.
And okay,
but it's imperative to our culture because it has an impact on how we engage with one another, right?
Yes,
because it's big in our system. So, connecting that to the rest of it, all of this, right, has come to a point where we have a lot of unhealthy ways of living going on, right, that have made the individual very sick, which creates a sick collective, right? And by sick, I want to define what I mean by sick, right, in several ways, right? And if it was just one, it wouldn't be as big of a deal, but it's overstressed, which is a huge one, right? Mentally ill. Most people are depressed. The between 18 and 35, roughly. Don't quite quote me on it. I don't know the numbers by moment, but roughly in there. The second biggest cause of death is suicide. And then on top of that, the first biggest in the world cause of death is heart disease. That's all sickness, right? And that's all caused by the culture and the way we're living.
Well, so this is where I don't know that you're making a leap from a description of effects to assigning a single cause, and I don't know. Sure. I would say let's push into that a little bit further, because there are also plenty of people who are flourishing, who are living longer than ever. There are plenty of examples of ways of organizing ourselves that do not replicate some of the tendencies of capitalism to abuse labor and resources.
Absolutely.
And you could also have an alternate description of things. Now, you'd have to recognize that sometimes those rose-colored glasses are themselves a function of privilege. Like, who gets to live well? Who gets to be mentally healthy? Who gets the support they need to flourish as a person, right? As a human being, whether they are living with, diversity of mental states or not. I mean, some of them are absolutely dysfunctional and people suffer from them, and others of them are just different, right? There's a whole movement around neurodiversity, right? To not stigmatize this way of thinking or that way of thinking or this expression or that expression. In other words, it's not always a pathology. We tend to say that somebody with a different way of organizing their mind, it crosses the boundary into the sick or the ill, and maybe they're not, unless they suffer, right? When someone's suffering, obviously we should help, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyhow, I digress.
Even though suffering in itself also isn't necessarily a bad thing, which is a whole nother philosophical.
Well, as human beings, we suffer. I mean, that's part of
part of existence. Exactly.
And at the same time, I think being complacent around that, or thinking that means you don't have to do anything about it, is again a position that can only be afforded from a place of privilege, right? So this is social safety nets, actual mechanics that would contribute to thriving of our collective. Those are all valuable things. Yes. I think it's a leap, and this is one man's point of view, but you're talking to me, so you're going to get it. Please. I think it's a leap to say that all of the broken things, of which there are many broken things, are that there's a single source, and that source is the culture of X, right?
You're right.
It does lead you to think, well, if that's true, then we got to throw it out and start with something new.
And so I want to be clear that I don't think that's exactly what I'm saying.
Great.
Okay. I think the culture helps lead to it a little bit, maybe, but don't get stuck on that, right? What it is it's what you were saying, right? It's all the systems, right?
Yes. That
are broken, right? Influencing and affecting each other. And just to change, you can change one, but the others are all so broken that changing that one doesn't do a whole lot. It does an amount, and it affects a lot of people, which is definitely, if you get one system fixed, awesome. But to really get it so like it's really functioning, flowing well, like a well-oiled machine, I believe you have to start over from scratch. And that's what I'm saying. Rebuild everything up.
Yeah, I mean, I get that's the majority, premise, but I don't know
that the majority are healthy instead of the majority are very healthy and feeling good instead of the minority.
Yeah,
right.
I understand that's the premise. I just don't think I agree with it.
Okay.
And just to throw another bit of intellectual fuel on the fire here, there was a French sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu, and Bourdieu was trying to describe things at the scale you're talking about. The education system in France, power relations, like things at a fairly high level. And yet he was a sociologist who wanted to focus on the nitty-gritty details of everyday life in order to do that. He wrote an entire book on systems of value, trying to understand how we rank ourselves socially in some sort of hierarchical way. But in order to do it, he would get really into the weeds to look at the nitty-gritty things. And he came up with a word that some people would use instead of culture. I'm not sure I would, but I think it's worth throwing into the mix here. And that word is habitus. Habitus. And it doesn't just mean habits, like the set of habits. He has a long description of this. He wrote many books on it, which are difficult to read. But the translated definition, translated from French, is, I'll say it, and it's ridiculous, and then we'll unpack it.
Okay.
His definition of habitus is structured structures predisposed to function as structuring structures. So what's he talking about? Okay. Structures, first of all. That's the core thing.
Sure.
What is an example of a structure? Well, the education system is a structure.
Yeah.
But also the physical space in a home or an office is a structure.
Totally.
It's a thing in which and around which other things happen.
Yes.
So he's telling us with his definition, his crazy, you can only get away with this if you're a French sociologist, that these structures are structured structures. Okay? In other words, something has gone to work that has produced these structures as a result.
The building is a structured structure.
The building is a structured structure.
Okay.
The education system is a structured structure.
Oh, okay.
The government and our forms of political practice is a structured structure.
Okay.
Okay. So in other words, didn't come out of nothing, right? It was a structured structure, and it is predisposed by its nature, right? That's what that means. It is predisposed to function as a structuring structure. So in other words, it was affected by the things that came before it, but its function. Now, by the way, why this is radical is at some level people would have said that structure and function are separate. You follow that? Like how the building is shaped is a different question from how it's used. Or in biology, the structure of an organ and the function of an organ are two different things. This is like basic biology, medical school stuff, whatever, right? What he's saying is that our structures have functions, and one of their functions is that they structure what comes after. Structured structures predisposed to function as structuring structures. So he's talking about that question of what's fixed and what's flexible at the same time, like what's static and what's dynamic. And the question is, they're both. So our education system is the way it is because in the 1920s, the idea emerged that all children should go to school. So compulsory education has not been around as long as people think it has. It was in an environment where creating docile workers who would sit still in rows for long periods of time supported an industrial factory-based system of economic production.
Exactly. One of the
so
worst
now
things
you've
that
got
happened
right
to America.
now you've got a set of ideas
Yeah.
being perpetuated that are meant to set the norms
Mm-hmm.
to which people are supposed to conform.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow this idea that sending your kids to school is what must be done sort of becomes this, what Bourdieu would, it's funny, I haven't thought about him since graduate school 12
I'm
years
glad you
ago.
thought about it today. I'm obsessed with this now.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So it establishes what he would call doxa. In other words, the way it's done, like we all take it for granted. It's doxic. It's the thing.
Yeah.
Knowing that that's never separate from power relations in any field of society or human relations, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing that there are people whose vested interest is being served by you thinking this is normal. Mm-hmm. So he brings that in there too, mm-hmm. right? Because he's French, he's not one of the revolutionary Frenchies, mm-hmm. But he also ironically ascended to the highest level and became doxic in his own way. Like Bourdieu's system for understanding everything, right, was taken as the thing that everyone should learn. And ironically, he would have been the one to kind of expose that in other areas. Huh. You see what I mean? Like it's interesting. So back to what I first said on the show today, being human, studying human phenomena makes us, mm-hmm. both the subject of that inquiry, we're the ones doing it. Yeah. We're the thinkers. Yeah. Thinking the thoughts about our thoughts. Yeah. Right? Uh-huh. So there's something circular and meta about it, but we can't get out of that.
That's what makes us human. That's our humanness is right there. It's like contemplating our own existence, correct?
Every one of those structures that you identify or diagnose is the proper term. You diagnose them as mm-hmm. sick, right? Mm-hmm. They are in themselves structured structures, mm-hmm. Predisposed to function as structuring structures. So they have effects. Yeah. Right? Yep. But they are also an effect. Mm-hmm. So at some level, understanding that rich human tradition, where did this come from? Why do we do it this way? How did that get started? Mm-hmm. Who benefits? Mm-hmm. Who's perpetuated it? Mm-hmm. Who's playing along without realizing it? At some level, what you're talking about is a call for education, a call for conversation, mm-hmm. right?
Absolutely.
A call for people to wake up at some level to the things they've taken for granted. Mm-hmm. And I just personally don't think you're going to get the richness out of that conversation if you handpick a few folks and stick them in some manufactured like biosphere or some island or something, right? Yeah. Because you're going to miss out on the fact that this is an extremely complex and multidimensional phenomenon.
No question.
And the idea that what if we picked everyone except for mm-hmm. the 8-year-old girl in Bangladesh who is going to become the next Einstein? What if we picked everyone we thought through our limited perspective and through our limited connections, mm-hmm. Was the future of humanity? And we put them in an island, but we forgot. So it's the Jurassic Park thing, right? Nature finds a way.
Let me say something real quick.
You following this?
Go ahead. I like what you're saying. I get what you're saying. I think the point isn't necessarily to take the best people, right? It's to take the people who have the skills that are needed, that are sufficient to get the job done, who are able to adapt their thinking. That's the key. It's not necessarily saying we need the next Einstein, right, to live here. It's saying we need the people who are going to be able to move and adapt in a new ways of thinking.
Yes.
To create a better...
Yes, and check this out.
Sure.
Everyone who's thought something innovative was thinking it against something that was already there. Yeah. What if you need the opposition, the alternative, the shit that's broken, in order to think of the innovation?
Of course.
Maybe you can't pull this out sui generis, as they say in Latin, from nothing, right? Yeah. Maybe you actually need to be in the brokenness to find the next thing. Like if Louis Pasteur wasn't in an environment riddled with smallpox, he wouldn't have even bothered trying to come up with vaccines.
Sure.
And I may have maybe it was Salk. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm a doctor, but not the kind that heals people.
No.
Okay. So let's not get confused. I don't know. I think the messiness, the uncooperative nature of a lot of our human society may in its own way be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Let me be clear again. And I think you're right. I don't disagree at all. I don't think that this society will be void of any of that. What I'm just trying to get at is better, right?
Right.
And allowing for that to happen more effectively. So you're going to have conflict. You're going to have people. People are people. People are going to do people things, right? But can you make it so there's not as much working against them? You want an amount of working against. You do. But, like, an entire society on an insanely heavy sugar diet isn't helping anyone.
No. But let me be clear. I'm country and society agnostic about this. The human phenomenon that I'm talking about is way bigger than this country.
Sure.
330 million people out of almost 8 billion?
Totally.
Why are we even trying to solve this problem? What if the way this problem gets solved is it goes away? I don't know. I'm not attached.
We just let the robots take over.
Well, yes, they
that's
will.
The next evolution of consciousness.
That's coming.
Right?
But we got at least another decade.
Yeah.
So let's do something.
I agree.
The other angle here that I want to kind of provoke you on a little bit is at some level what you're aspiring to is an apolitical space of inquiry and invention. In other words, you want to somehow get out of the situation we're in to something more pure, pristine, and then try to create from there. And what I would push back on is, why not go to work on what's now instead of what's next? Why not engage in the world you actually live in?
Who says I'm not doing that?
Well, I don't know. I'm assuming
I know,
the premise
You're
is
right.
we're going to put a bunch of people on an island and give them all the resources in the world. And immediately I get the heebie-jeebies because I'm like, Jurassic Park is real, and like, what makes you think that the creatures are going to stay contained? You know? But also because I just don't. I think that's just like, why not?
Sure.
Why not work in the world we're in? And if you don't like this society, and I don't say this in the way that some of my fellow Arizonans would say, like, if you don't like it, leave. I'd be like, actually, that's a great idea. Because the number one thing that I think is missing, if I could wave a magic wand, and touch somebody or some buddies at scale, and give them one thing, it would be perspective.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
That's it.
Absolutely.
In my view, self-awareness is super important.
Absolutely.
But it's secondary because you can't see yourself for who you really are apart from the stories you tell yourself about yourself, 80% of which aren't true.
Yeah.
Without perspective. You have to have seen other things, other places, other people, other practices. When you do that, something magical happens. You realize, I'm not special. The way I do it isn't the best. It's not even good. There's advantages to the way somebody moves their body or what they eat or how they pray or what they do. Like, wow, I've been focusing on this narrow slice when really the human thing, anthropos, in all of its robust, messy totality, is this. It's this much bigger thing. Maybe we're actually going to be okay.
Well, I guess we got to get into defining, like, what is okay. Like, we are okay, right?
I'm okay.
For the most part, we're okay, right?
Right. I'm more than okay.
But can we be better than okay?
Of course.
You know, right? And I think that's what we should go for is, let's be better than okay.
Right.
You know? And let's
but
provide
why not do that here?
Better than okay.
Now. Because you're here now.
I agree.
Maybe that's what the show is actually doing.
But here's what I like, and I would have arrived at this conclusion without a serious amount of thought on it, right? And
a little Bourdieu or something.
Yeah. So, well, what it is that there's an amount you can do, right? But really making it better for the next generation, because that's really the point. Like, for me, I'm not going to get to really live in that society.
My life isn't for me.
No, like And like honestly, like I'm pretty cool with where I'm at. I love Phoenix. I love, the people here and you and, all the other people that I've met. And like, I want to make, and I am going to do what I can to make Phoenix as best as possible.
Yes.
But it's really about, again, I believe the human species and carrying it on and getting to a point where we're really becoming better and like hitting our optimal ability. Because we're a pretty amazing thing.
I think we're the most underrated thing.
Yeah. Right.
On the planet, and we're the ones doing the underrating.
Yeah,
nobody else. The rocks and trees actually are not out there saying like, human beings suck.
No,
right? They're not. Your dog thinks you're the most amazing thing ever. The only phenomena that is downplaying the human is the human. Okay, so I mean, I agree, and again, the perspective that I'm bringing is, a guy who was blessed and fortunate. Mm-hmm. That as a function of my birth, mm-hmm. I had the skin tone and the passport and the family mm-hmm. That allowed me to travel the world starting when I was 18 months old, mm-hmm. before I even remember. Mm-hmm. But my first international trip was at 18. I've lived and worked in over 30 countries, spent more than a decade in Africa and the Middle East. There's lots of parts of the world that I'm not completely ignorant of. But I've been around a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I'm just not, at some level, I think that's part of why I'm not bothered by some of these things. I'm like, this isn't the whole story.
Right. Right.
And at the same time, I think we have to resist the complacency mm-hmm. of it. Mm-hmm. Right? This isn't the whole story and it's broken. Yeah. This isn't the whole story and we need to do better here now.
Yeah.
I don't live in Darfur at the moment, although I did. 12 years ago. I don't live in Iraq at the moment, although mm-hmm. I did, mm-hmm. During that conflict in 2003, mm-hmm. Or right after. And so I'm here now. I'm not here forever, right?
Yeah.
But I'm here now.
Yeah.
My kids are growing up here now.
Sure.
Till we move,
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, my wife's Canadian. Like we already have, like my kids are dual citizens, and my job is to get, listen. That's the fact that we're part of the 23% of America that even has passports mm-hmm. is something that I don't want to take for granted. And my job is not to show them how daddy and mommy think it should be done. But, I mean, that's part of the job. But to show them how it's being done and give them opportunities to participate and engage. My 6-year-old, I've never kind of really gone heavy-handed with him on environmental stuff uh-huh. at all. And he is so passionate about nature and the earth, and he gets like mm-hmm. viscerally mad mm-hmm. when he sees somebody littering. He's like, don't they know that they're hurting the planet? And like, I promise you, like, even though I'm from the left coast and like have a Berkeley PhD, like I am not indoctrinating him with that stuff. I'm proud of him that he's come up with it. He came up with it on his own.
No, he's not.
Well, you're right. He's not.
He's getting that from somewhere.
He's getting it from, he watches PBS Kids and like he goes to the museums and goes to the zoo and like, but he's getting it, right?
Yeah, sure.
And arriving at it. And like, I think we all should arrive at things through our own efforts. When I used to teach the history, politics, and culture of the Middle East at Berkeley, I'd have 100 students in my class every semester, and they all walked in with preconceptions. Mm-hmm. The Jewish kids, the Christian kids, the Muslim kids, the Palestinian kids versus the Saudi kids versus the Egyptian kids.
Yeah.
The people who had never been there, but who had some idea about it from the news, or people who had family living in the region. Whether it was in Jerusalem or whether it was in the occupied Palestinian territory, everyone walked in with something.
Yeah, right. Totally.
And I told them, my job here is not to give you the right answer, because I'm not sure that we have gotten that. We haven't figured that out yet. My job is to get you to question your assumptions enough that when you walk out of this class, whatever you believe, you've had a chance to look at under the microscope of critical thinking. And I will give you historical facts. I will introduce you to primary sources. I will give you access to different schools of analysis about the history and the emergence of the phenomenon we call the contemporary Middle East. And if at the end of the day you keep the view you walked in with, but you've looked at it carefully and decided that it is what you want to keep, I've done my job. It's not even to change your point of view. It's to give you enough of an opportunity to scrutinize your point of view.
Man, I love it. Like that. I think we're gonna end the podcast there because you got to get going here soon.
Yeah.
And
we got to go save the world, man.
Yeah, we got to go save the world. Let's get after it. But that was like the point. Like that's honestly what I'm trying to really get at with this podcast. It's just saying, here's another perspective.
Love it.
You know, what else could possibly be potentially, right? So with that, last question. Where can people find you online and in person, and what challenges are you facing, and how might they be able to help you solve some of your challenges?
All right, cool. So online, I am available everywhere. Adrian McIntyre can be Googled.
Mm-hmm. Right? And I'll leave some links
Yeah, put that in there.
Yeah.
I have I speak for companies and the other organizations that put on large events. Mm-hmm. I lead private workshops for, again, companies or entrepreneurs, nonprofits, on the power of story and how we can use our personal stories both to connect with each other in a more meaningful way, mm-hmm. as well as to begin remaking the culture mm-hmm. of our organization, changing the conversation mm-hmm. at work as well as in the world. Mm-hmm. And I am opening, this is the first time I've announced it publicly, but I'm opening cool. a digital radio studio here in Phoenix, part of the Business Radio X network.
Oh, sweet.
This is Business Radio X is a business talk radio that is an internet radio station. It's started in Atlanta over 10 years ago.
Cool.
A little over a year ago, my colleague Karen Nowicki opened the first Business Radio X studio west of Atlanta in Tempe. And there's now a studio opened in Tucson, and I'm opening the third one in Arizona this month. And so, how people can help me is help me find and connect with the conversation leaders in mm-hmm. our community, whether they work for big companies, whether they are entrepreneurs, whether they are independent professionals or nonprofit and community leaders. Because changing the conversation starts with having the conversation.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm committed to.
Love it, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
It was phenomenal. I couldn't expect anything better.
I enjoyed it.
Me too, man.